we'd like to present Not Seen Before.
I think you want everybody to smoke weed.
This is Horace Gracie, and you're listening to the Inside BJJ
Welcome back
podcast.
to the Inside BJJ podcast. I am joined right now with a good friend of mine and somebody who has already done some pretty tremendous things in the Jiu-Jitsu community through his nonprofit Guardian Gym, which really does an amazing thing in that, you know, everybody loves Jiu-Jitsu. Jiu-Jitsu saved my life. Jiu-Jitsu did this. Jiu-Jitsu did that. Guardian actually helps kids train Jiu-Jitsu for free, especially kids that are in situations who wouldn't normally be able to train. Usually it's economic, but sometimes there's other factors that play into it. Guardians all over the United States and international, they're doing some great things. On top of that, this guy has just picked up a major role at one of the largest grappling promotions, maybe the largest in the world. And so we want to have him on. We'd like to welcome the one and only Ben Kovacs to the Inside BJJ podcast. What's going on, Ben?
Thanks for having me, Tim. Good to see you again.
It's good to see you again. It's been several years since you've been on the program. I haven't been able to wrangle you in. I've visited with you. I've had you to my house. I've broken bread, but couldn't get you back on. But some big things are happening, and I wanted to have you in, man. So thank you.
Of course, man. You had me on your podcast when Guardian was just like getting started back in the day when we had one academy, and now it's all over the world and it's big, and can't forget the people who took a little shot on you before you did something good.
The little guys. I'm a little guy and I love other little guys. Once you get big, I'm like, nah, I can't deal with you anymore. I can only work with the littles. So, hey man, let's just rip the Band-Aid off right now. Some real big news. Ben, you have taken over as the general manager for FloGrappling, which I think is a huge shakeup in the industry, in my opinion. You just kind of started recently. Can you walk us through how in the hell did this happen? I've known you for a long time, and when you told me this was going down, I literally thought you were lying. I'm like, there's no way. This guy's so full of shit. He did not do that. But here we are, man. So just talk us through, how did this happen? How did you pull this off?
Well, I mean, I think like most good things in life, it was sort of an accident, right? Maybe meant to be. I had reached out to one of my buddies is on the
Yeah, keep going. I'm just fixing it.
I reached out to one of my buddies who was on the FloGrappling team, the content team. And I said, hey, we're partnered now with all these big names and big apparel companies and doing great things at Guardian. Like, how do we do something with Flo? And he was just like, I don't know, like let me try to figure that out. But in the meantime, we're having trouble finding the right person for this job, right? Because it's sort of business experience, grappling experience, kind of a mix of everything, right? And he said, why don't you reach out to this guy who's the hiring manager for it? So I thought, you know what? I'll reach out to him and just kind of see what's going on. I'm sure it won't lead to anything. But once I did, I kind of started realizing like, wow, this job's actually really cool. And I'm actually really qualified for it in some ways. So just started a conversation, and it was a very kind of lengthy and long interview process, to be honest, because it's a very cross departmental, working organization, right? With the tech teams and the events teams and the rights acquisitions teams and all the different things that Flo has. So it was a pretty lengthy, long process. And I think by the end, I realized, I think I can make a difference here. And I think Flo thought this is the right guy for the job.
What was the driving force that compelled you to even get into the batter's box and take a shot at it? Because a lot of people, if they had the opportunity, they talk big, but they wouldn't get on that plane and fly out to Austin and interview for the job. They just wouldn't do it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's everything jiu-jitsu related is easy for me, except actual jiu-jitsu, which just I love jiu-jitsu, right? Like you, like we're kind of the same. We're probably around the same age, and we've got like a similar mindset, which is like it brings so much happiness to our life, gives us such a great community. And obviously with what I have with Guardian and all the goodwill we put into the world with helping kids get into jiu-jitsu, everywhere. I just, it's easy for me to talk about grappling, right? I don't feel like it's a job to like go interview or talk to people. And I thought worst case scenario, at least I'll meet some new people at Flow, and maybe there'll be some sort of a partnership opportunity that, can come out of it, even if it's not a job. But as I started going deeper in the process, I started actually thinking like what I'm doing at Guardian is actually not that much different than what needs to happen at Flow. And what I mean by that is at Guardian, our whole idea is that we push the idea of kids getting into jiu-jitsu regardless of financial limitations, right? We grow the sport that way and we make it bigger, we make it more accessible. And I think Flow really, although it's obviously a great business, is sort of the same concept, right? Which is if we do a good job of covering jiu-jitsu content, signing the right promotions, operating our own events more effectively, we're also doing the same thing there, which is doing good things that grow the sport of jiu-jitsu, make more people interested in it, and make fans and athletes become super fans and athletes, right? So it just sort of is a kind of a natural fit, I would say, for my mindset of what I want to do. And, I think it's very possible to really grow this thing from here in a good way that benefits both athletes and fans, right? And the promotional partners or the rights partners that we have.
How are you handling, and this is just straight up, this is what the game is. There's a lot of criticism of FloGrappling. I think, and I can speak for myself, I think I have a kind of a read on the jiu-jitsu world, just a little bit. I'm like you, I know a lot about jiu-jitsu except actual jiu-jitsu. The jiu-jitsu community has been a little bit segmented in terms of this is Flo and this is ADCC and Gordon Ryan and Mo Jassim and all these guys over here. And then over here is Craig and CJI and all the other dudes who are doing their thing. And people kind of like took sides, especially ADCC, CJI, right? They're like, I'm with this. Some people went back and forth, but they're definitely sides. How do you approach this kind of perception problem that the jiu-jitsu community has with FloGrappling? Like, how do you define it? And then how do you go about tackling it and making it better?
Well, I guess besides sort of the picking sides idea, like what do you think the perception problems are with FloGrappling? Because maybe then I can answer specifically. Yeah, that. For sure.
So, right off the top, there's a general kind of consensus that there's some favorites being played. So there's some favored citizens at FloGrappling who get the coverage, get the money. And this is speculation. This is rumor. Yes, there's some published details about some things, but there's kind of a general sentiment that some athletes are getting paid. Others are not getting paid the same, but maybe they're getting paid in other ways that aren't being actually kind of put out there, right? I know Mika's name came up with this. There's been a lot of speculation about Gordon with that. So that's one criticism, because there's such a big push for athlete pay. Everyone wants to see the athletes get paid. Even the athletes want to see each other get paid, but sometimes there's a little bit of a competitiveness. Feels like it's a zero-sum game. It's like, hey, if he gets extra, then I don't. So that's one criticism, that there's some kind of like backroom deals that go on between the athletes. The other is that Flo doesn't engage the jiu-jitsu community in a way that's helpful for the jiu-jitsu community. Perfect example is the renewal process. I've been bit by it. I know a lot of people have been bit by it. They're not super happy about it. So those are two kind of things that, even though they're totally distinct issues, they're examples of issues that the jiu-jitsu community kind of has with Flo. So how do you come into this role knowing that there are criticisms and there are issues? How do you address these? How do you tackle them as a guy from the outside?
Well, I would be lying if I said, being in my third week now, that I have the answers to all of them. I'll just be honest about that. My mindset is that FloGrappling is a good company, first and foremost, is how I felt during the interview process here, meaning it's founder-led. Mark Floriani, the co-founder of the company, 20 years later or whatever it is still the CEO of the company, right? And there's a passion. When I interviewed, it went something like this: hey, if we have a partner who's not happy with us, let's figure out how to get them out of our contract, right? If there's an athlete that doesn't want to be here, let's not force them to be here, right? There's a mentality within the company of doing the right things for our customers and for our partners. And I think that, some of this is just it's clearly like something's getting lost between that reality of how the company's talking internally, asking the question at every meeting, is this good for the customer, is the first question, not is it good for the bottom line, and how the fans on the outside feel about FloGrappling. And I believe it's really a communications and a messaging problem more than anything, right? And when you do jiu-jitsu, this more than anybody, you probably spend anywhere from $300 to $1,200 a month to do jiu-jitsu. And when I say that is, you have your membership fee at your academy, you buy apparel like gis and rash guards, you travel to certain tournaments like IBJJF or ADCC, you go to CJI, or you go to some of the big, fight to wins or whatever the tournaments are that, are of interest to you. You take private lessons, you go to seminars. All of those things that I just mentioned, you view as an investment in yourself, and you view as an investment in the sport. A lot of people, a guy comes through, is teaching $100 seminar, and he's part of your Gracie Baja Association, or he's part of your 10th Planet, community in your case. And you go to support that guy in part to like better the sport of jiu-jitsu, help that guy out because you see it as an investment. But for whatever reason, when you take, let's say $150 a year for an annual FloGrappling subscription, that's like $13 a month. And when someone looks at that and says, hey, what's your problem with FloGrappling? They're like, oh my God, the price is so expensive. So you're talking about $13 out of 500 or 700 or 300 or 1,000, depending on how much you invest in your sport. And I really believe this to the core, that we have not, as a company, as FloGrappling, I should say, not as the whole FloSports, but as FloGrappling in particular, we haven't been able to transparently and clearly convey why having a FloGrappling subscription is actually an investment and not an expense. And that might sound like a little corny, right? Because, of course it's an expense, but like there's some expenses that you feel good about paying for, right? You use Netflix every day. You don't wake up and think, oh, fuck Netflix, right? You think, man, like I use Netflix, I'm not going to cancel it or whatever, right? So I think that's like the biggest thing we have to do, right? Is be transparent and speak to people about, what FloGrappling is. FloGrappling's probably invested more in the sport of grappling than anybody over the last decade. Athlete pay, putting on events, making behind the scenes content, right? It's not this big bad company making tens of millions of dollars a year and screwing the little guy and not paying the athletes, forcing them to sign exclusive contracts. In fact, Flo's really going the opposite way of that, right? You see other promotions coming in and saying, hey, you got to be exclusive. We're going to own your rights. We're going to own your likeness. We're going to own your image. You're only going to fight on our promotion. Is that great for the sport? Or is the Flo approach of saying, hey, like you can fight in other promotions. We'll even pay you sometimes when you fight in other promotions. There's so many things that Flo's doing that are not being conveyed. And I think that's the biggest thing I can do in this job, right? Is start to affect both sort of internal changes and focus us on the things that are really moving the needle, and convey that to the outside world so people have a better understanding of what we're investing in.
I think you hit on something there, Ben, that is a perceived value issue on behalf of the jiu-jitsu community. So a typical kind of interaction might go like this. ADCC's coming up. Oh man, I want to watch it. I want to get a subscription to Flo. So you go in and you sign up. You're like, okay, I'm on the hook for this. You jump onto the event, and then, and I'm not saying Flo doesn't do some things well. They do some things very, very well. And you're absolutely right. In terms of investment and infrastructure, Flo is probably the largest in the jiu-jitsu community. And then if you include Flo Wrestling, that's for grappling in general, that's pretty huge, right? A lot of good things going on there. The experience from the practitioner's side is that, hey, here's this thing coming up. I want to watch it. Oh man, I had to sign up. I got duped into signing up for a year. This is just what people talk about. I only wanted to watch ADCC, but I bought it for the year. I don't know if Flo has a monthly subscription where you could just pay for 1 month, or if it is a year. I sign up for the year. I invest in jiu-jitsu. However, so they go on. They're trying to find the guys they want to watch. There's 8 matches going at the same time. Sometimes the camera's pointing at the wall, and you just see the athlete's feet. So there's some maybe quality issues. It's not that the quality isn't there. It's that maybe it's not consistent across the matches. And then there's a perception of coverage bias in the sense that like Flo's favorites are going to get covered, and anything that's not happening in that box doesn't exist, right? And I think to the viewer, it feels a little bit like there's some favoritism going on. Maybe the little guys are getting neglected. Maybe they're not getting beefed up as much as they should. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of an experience from the customer standpoint. So they have this touch point with Flo that maybe isn't as positive as they would like or expect. They don't get that value right out of the gate, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe they have like a little bit of a tricky user experience, and then they walk away and they're like, it was good. I got to watch it, but the matches jumped around a lot. Half of this match I didn't see. Half of that I didn't like. The commentator was super biased towards it. And you're always going to have those preferential things from people. But it definitely is a common theme that I hear a lot. And then the other thing, which is personal, is that I could not get a media pass to cover ADCC. I had to sneak in to T-Mobile Arena, electronic equipment, stuff them in my pockets, hide them. Everything was covert. We had to interview people under the shadow of darkness. And we're not trying to steal Flo's content. We're trying to big up the jiu-jitsu community. Mm-hmm. And what that does is, it makes the outsider feel like this is our cool kids club and your name's not on the list, right? From the media standpoint of it, a lot of these guys trying to cover it, such as myself, have been doing this for over a decade at our own expense. When, jiu-jitsu is getting more coverage now, but for a long time, nobody was covering it. Mm-hmm. And so you're out there trying to do it, but the promotion isn't necessarily opening the door for you, going, yeah, we'd love to have you come in and take a look at this. Obviously, we don't want you to live stream the finals, right, on your YouTube page. But if you're going to interview somebody or talk about it or hype it up, yeah, let's go.
It's like the world's longest question. I don't even know where to start.
It's like a 6-part question. Yeah.
So, the simple thing here. So I think I've heard this many, many times. Why does Flo only have an annual subscription? This is a perfect example of like a lack of communication from our side. Flo's had a monthly subscription now for, I think, 2 years. So we have that offering. And for people who just want to buy a single event or just want a very, brief, cheaper subscription because they don't want to commit to the whole year, we do have that, right? Obviously, there's a discount to do it annually, a pretty significant discount. But, we're talking about a monthly subscription that's a third of the price of a standard UFC pay-per-view now. So I think it's pretty palatable for people, right? Whether it's watching your son at a fight to win match, or whether it's just watching ADCC, that option is definitely there. So just want to be super clear about that. I think in terms of the last part that you said there about the media entries and everything, there's really 2 parts with some of these events, right? So keep in mind that IBJJF and ADCC and BJJ Stars, right? These are rights partners of Flo, right? Everyone has a different sort of level of involvement there and a different set of rules. So I'm not 100% sure in that case, right? Was that an ADCC thing? Was that a Flo thing? Why did that not happen? Obviously with this new job, that's something I'm going to be looking into and pushing a lot more, right? Is opening up some of that access to the non-traditional media. But I'd also say that in this case, and Flo probably had a good filter there. If they stopped you, right, they're probably pretty good.
Now, wait a minute. Now, go ahead. I want you to see me while you're saying this, though.
Yeah. So, I don't know. What was the rest of the 6-part question?
What I'm doing is I'm just touching on the general ideas that come up over and over and over again when people talk about Flo. And you're right. Sometimes it's not informed. It's like, hey, there's been a monthly, subscription for 2 years now. Nobody knows that. Right. Everybody's like, look, you don't get Flo unless you're going to go on the hook for a year. And you better put a reminder in your phone so it doesn't auto renew in 12 months because you're going to be pissed and you're not going to get your money back.
Again, because it goes back to that point, right? People don't feel like we're delivering an investment value all the time, right? You don't mind Netflix auto renewing or Disney auto renewing or whatever you're using, but ESPN Plus or whatever, right? But FloGrappling, right? A similar priced product to all the things I just mentioned of the sport that you love the most and is the most of anyone in the world in the last 10 years. Doesn't feel that way, right? And I just think we need to be a little bit more transparent. And the things that we're not doing well or that we don't have, that's okay too, right? Like people don't want to hear, everything's perfect, we're the best at everything. There's certain things that I'd like to happen faster here, right? That I'd like to see come to fruition quicker, or change to be made. And I think it's better to just tell people like, hey, that's not going to be here till next year, right? You want to see an increased functionality in that part of the tech that's slated for February 2026. Like, here's what we're doing between now and then, be patient with us and we'll get there. They just want to hear the truth. They don't want to hear, hey, this is ready and it's not there, or hey, this will be done next month. Just sign up, let your subscription go. We just have to be truthful with people. We have, only a small percentage of the jiu-jitsu community obviously subscribes to Flow, right? It's not 75% of jiu-jitsu practitioners and fans subscribe to Flow, right? So we don't have to be something for everyone, right? We don't need 50% of the jiu-jitsu community to accept it. We need a small group, that 10% or whatever it is of the jiu-jitsu community that absolutely loves Flow, understands our offering, appreciates the tech, et cetera. And we need to create those true fans, in my opinion, right? Not necessarily be something to everybody. And I think a lot of that comes with, just being transparent.
So what is your top priority in terms of handling the perception issue? Like you talked about, we need to be more transparent. We need to communicate better. But what does that actually break down into? Like, what is that? What does it mean to be transparent? How are you going to be transparent? How are you going to communicate better? Are there actual concrete objectives and tasks that have been developed, or is this still kind of like, hey, we're figuring it out?
I mean, I think like anybody with, I think anybody who's perceptive and, wants to make change, it doesn't mean you come into a job and you just start making changes, right? You come into a job and the first thing you have to do, especially in an organization like this that's so complex and has so many moving parts, is you have to listen, right? You have to get to know all these different teams, get to understand the history of why certain decisions were made. You have to, understand the landscape of what's going on and where people are signing exclusive contracts and, what the athletes want. So to me, I'm in a listening period, right? I don't know how long that listening period needs to last, right? But I think for the next couple months, call it, 60 days into the job, I should really be doing very little in terms of changes and be really listening and trying to formulate a plan with having all the data, all the facts, all the understandings. When we do move, we're actually moving once and we're moving correctly, not just throw things against the wall, see what sticks, just get everybody spun up and do a million things, right? I think that's the exact opposite thing that we need to do. So, yeah, I mean, I guess the truth is, like, do I have like a communications plan yet? Are we going to roll out certain changes on a certain day? No. I mean, I'll be at WNO. There'll be some announcements that come out in the coming days by the time this podcast airs. So there's going to be some public stuff that happens, but it's not going to be, effectuating a bunch of change right away. It's also a big moving ship, right? So, when you're doing tech enhancements to the platform, right, creating new search and notifications and things like that, for example, that's not something that happens overnight. That's something that might be on a 6-month or a 12-month product roadmap. And so to me, when I talk about communicating and everything, it's like, what are those changes? Okay, you're not happy with the search functionality of FloGrappling? Great. We're going to change that. And let me be honest, how and when that's going to roll out. That's going to roll out in, I'm just making this up, but that's going to roll out in 9 months. Here's why, and here's what's going to happen when that rolls out. And I think as a consumer, you might not love that answer. You might want it today, but you feel a lot more trust for a company and for a person running a division of a company when they're telling you that truthful answer, not just telling you what you want to hear.
You mentioned that you're listening and you're in listening mode. Who are you listening to? Are there segments of the jiu-jitsu community that you're like, if I was just off the top of my head, you have the viewer, right? You have the consumer, let's just call it the consumer for lack of a better word. They love to do jiu-jitsu and they want to consume this content. And then you have folks such as myself that we are consumers, but we're also producing content, right? So we have a vested interest in what's produced and what we can use, what we can't use. Can we use Flow as a distribution platform or not, et cetera? And then you have the athletes, right, who you're trying to work with, sign contracts with, put them out there and put them on display. And then you have internal folks at Flow. Like you said, there's a lot of decisions that were made. There's a backstory behind these decisions, and that's not always public, and it shouldn't be always public, obviously, right? There's things that happen in business that stay behind closed doors, and that's how it's supposed to be. outside of that, like, are those the groups you're listening to? Is there any other groups you're listening to, or you're soliciting, or you're looking into?
Yeah, I mean, I think to give you a better answer there, I think, or a non-stock easy answer is this. So yes, those are all groups of people to listen to, right? Our athletes, our internal stakeholders, employees, the fans, the FloGrappling subscribers, et cetera. Like, those are all obvious buckets. I think the one bucket, though, that we have historically probably missed is sort of the non-considering folks, right? And what I mean by that is we're really good at surveying people who are users on the platform, or maybe somebody who's just recently canceled a FloGrappling subscription for whatever reason. We can survey those folks, right? But how do we talk to the rest of the folks who are not considering a FloGrappling subscription right now? We don't have their email address, we don't have their phone number, we don't know who they are by name, right? We know there's millions of those people out there in the world, but how do we talk to them, right? And that's one of my biggest focuses, right, is finding those people. And honestly, there's not like an easy way to do this because it's extremely expensive to survey that way, right? You have to hire third-party companies and you have to go through all these hoops. I just walk into gyms, right? Like, I trained with Danaher last night, right? I didn't know Danaher till last night. We sat there for 25 minutes before the class and we just talked, and I said, how would you make FloGrappling better, right? And he went off on his tangents about, this is what my athletes tell me, this is my perception, this is your rule set, this is the challenges and the good and the bad that you're going to have with your kind of rule set for WNO. And it was great, right? It was kind of like a master class from someone who has really great ideas in jiu-jitsu. If I do this job right, I don't have to come up with almost anything on my own, right? I'm just a filter. I'm listening to the best brains in the industry and taking the 1% or the 0.1% of the things that they say and going, wow, that's a really great idea, and we can actually implement that or change that. Let's do that. Not, oh, Ben has 500 ideas, which I do, of course, but like, maybe I'll have one new idea that gets implemented a year, right? Maybe we'll make one new event that I want to do, or we'll put some spin on something, or we'll hire some new, cool employee that's going to move the needle or whatever that I'm passionate about that can make a difference. But the main thing is just listening to the Danahers, right? Listening to the athletes that are competing on the cards, listening to the fans. And I think maybe jiu-jitsu has gotten a little too focused on sort of like the top 10. Like, what's good for you, Tim, as an owner of 2 jiu-jitsu academies? Like, how does this top 10 stuff really help you, other than, it might drive some awareness into the sport, but like, what are the tools out there that you need as an academy owner? What can you offer your students to differentiate? Like, you're a distribution point as an academy owner. How do we help you? How do we endear you to FloGrappling? So when you're talking to your students and FloGrappling comes up, you're not like, oh, fuck FloGrappling, right? Like, whatever you say now, you're like, dude, FloGrappling's actually made a bunch of great changes over the last 6 months. You should look at them again. Or, oh, like, FloGrappling's too expensive. You're like, do you know they have a monthly option now? Like, how do we create advocates out of people who have typically not been our advocates, right? And I think 10th Planet's a perfect example of that. I don't have the data for this, but I highly doubt that we over-index on 10th Planet members as subscribers compared to other gyms, right? So how do we change that, right? What can we do that would be better for the 10th Planet people? Do we need to cover more content behind the scenes for 10th Planet? Do we need to get more 10th Planet guys in our tournaments? Do we need to, talk about flat earth more? Like, no, I'm just kidding. What do we need to do, right? So that's the kind of thing I'm saying with like listening, filtering, and then, putting things in that are going to actually endear people in some way to us. And again, not for everybody, but let's just find those 10, 20% of passionate, true fans that really believe in what we're doing.
How do you filter? And what I mean by that is, obviously you step into this role, everybody's got an idea, and they're all going to get thrown at you pretty quickly, pretty fast at the same time. How does Ben Kovacs take these ideas into account and then, kind of group them, classify them, rank them, prioritize them, and figure out what needs to move forward and what's just like, dude, this guy's crazy?
I mean, a lot of people have heard that Derek Sivers, Tim Ferriss podcast stuff that they've done a bunch of times, where I think the saying is, if it's not a hell yes, it's a no. I think that saying is super important for this job, because there's so many people that want to put their promotions on FloGrappling, right? There's so many athletes that want to be featured. There's so much opportunity to sign new things, to make your own events, do whatever. We have to go after, in my opinion, like the 0.1% that are going to be awesome and move the needle, because everything we say yes to is going to suck bandwidth away from everything else, if that makes sense. And so I think, like, in some ways, it's like doing less to do more is a very reasonable strategy for this job.
how do you do that? Focus on that 1% that moves the needle and develop new talent. Because what I mean is it would be very easy to just say, look, we're going to chase Gordon Ryan for every big event we have. And we're going to see if we can get him because we know we're going to get more eyeballs. And then the next one, we're going to chase him again because he's the 1%. He moves the needle. He moves the needle. And we know he moves the needle, right? How do you move the needle and develop talent at the same time? That maybe, they don't have the influence that Gordon has. They don't have the following. They don't have the record. They have potential, but it's just untapped at that point.
Mm. Well, I mean, I think this is like a classic conundrum, I think at the end of the day, right, what we really probably want as a company to some extent is we want to find value, right? Like anybody could buy NVIDIA stock last year after it had already, went up to a $3 trillion market cap, but you've actually lost money, right? If you bought NVIDIA near the peak. And I think that's kind of the same way with athletes. And, you see this with the NFL. They're constantly releasing top tier athletes when their expensive contracts come up, and then they're redrafting new talent and they're building that talent up and they're getting them through those prime early NFL years. Right. And, I think of in some ways what we're doing in Flow is like a little bit of like a VC for the grappling, community. Like how do we take smaller bets on new athletes that could pay off big or new promotions that could pay off big down the road while still maintaining sort of that marquee star promotion and athlete partnership that we need to make sure that Flow is the destination for the best grappling out there, right? We kind of have to have both to some extent. I think, to be honest, naturally I over-index a little bit more on like, let's build more talent. Let's build more homegrown events. Let's do a little bit more of that stuff. We can do that, and we can build these new stars and give them a platform than I am like kind of buying the peak 5 guys, right? If that makes sense, or investing in just the peak 5 guys or girls. So we'll see how that shakes out. I don't, know for sure yet or have an exact answer, but it's certainly something I'm thinking about now every day, which is how do we grow the sport and open it up to that new talent, not just talk about the top 5 guys and girls that everybody already knows about and everybody's fighting over, and that are probably in some cases, certainly not all cases, but in some cases like the most challenging to work with, and, to have that leverage.
Let's talk about those cases. I think, and you asked a question earlier, as a school owner, what does it take for me to have a vested interest in Flow? Instead of going like, hey, we all need to pray for Flow, guys. We're like, hey, Flow's good. Have you heard about what they're doing? I would say one of the, kind of things as a school owner that you're doing is you're obviously you're trying to pay bills, you're trying to get students, but you're also at your local academy trying to develop talent. And not all the time, but once in a while, you come across guys that are pretty damn good. And you think, hey, you have a lot of potential to move forward. If Flow had some way of interacting with academies on that level, as a school owner, that's extremely helpful. And I know that means you're going to have a bunch of people go like, my guy's the best, you got to sign him. But there has to be a way to have that communication back and forth, even if it's a wash and it's like, nah, we're filtering him out. He's not a hell yeah. But as a gym owner, if I could lobby a name out there and go like, hey man, look at these guys. These guys are good. You should be paying attention to that. And know that someone on the Flow side will at least read the email, right? Maybe give it 5 minutes of thought. Maybe get it 3 minutes of thought. As a coach, that's a huge thing for me, because not every academy is New Wave, right? Yeah. Not every academy is Marcelo Garcia or Mendez Brothers Art of Jiu-Jitsu. There's a lot of good talent out there that's overlooked, I would say, that doesn't even get scratched on because there's no way to get those names.
You said a couple. I don't mean to cut you off from another 6-minute question, but what you said is near and dear to my heart, in the sense that, I think there's a lot of untapped talent out there. Like when I trained at Ralph Gracie Berkeley, where I got my belts, Austin Hart, as a white belt, created the buggy choke there, right? He made that move super famous. He's now putting out this crazy overproduced instructional on it, well-produced instructional on it. He was tapping black belts everywhere he went as a white belt with that move. No one had any clue what the hell a buggy choke was, and he was amazing at it. That would have been something that would have been amazing content to surface to a Flow community, because a couple things. Number one, Austin would have been stoked to show his move on Flow Grappling, right? Like,
Yeah.
you imagine being a white or a blue or a purple belt and Flow Grappling comes to you and says, we want to feature you, in our main content portal. I mean, that would be pretty cool. Nobody's saying no to that, right? Now you go to the best guy in the world, right? And they're like, yeah, cool, pay me to show that.
Right.
I think we actually create a win-win there where like those people are looking for exposure. Gym owners are looking to, in your case, like you'd love to showcase your best, student and their move. You'd love to get them nominated for a Who's Number One event or an undercard somewhere or whatever. You said something though that grabbed me, which was email, right? And I think that's the problem, which is we can't be lost in the sea of DMs. We can't be lost in the sea of emails. There has to be a better mechanism for filtering this stuff and getting it in there, right? I don't know if it's a type form or it's something more advanced through the app, but there has to be a better way to sort of get those responses so the best ones can come to the top, right? It can't be a general email that just becomes now like a human scanning it depending on their mood that day, or one person sees it, doesn't really know what they're looking at. You got to have a better way to intake that information. So that's definitely something that's sort of near and dear to me, is to figure out ways that we can work closer with these schools in a positive way that benefits everybody. Because look, it's hard. Your job's hard. Like, you're spending 25 hours a week in the gym teaching all these classes. You're probably not making a ton of money. I know there's some gyms that make a lot of money, but most of the gyms are like you, right? They're like mom and pop. They're, they do it because they love it. They work in second jobs to make ends meet, whatever it is. And I just think there's a real opportunity there to just kind of help everyone, even if it's just a little bit, right? Not like I'm an underdog guy too, right? I want to root for the under guys. I want to see the little guys come up. Like, I don't want to just throw money at like necessarily the person who's already won, as much as I want to see the young girl come up and have an opportunity.
Yeah. And I think that something that's really lacking on the jiu-jitsu side is a development infrastructure. So what often happens is it's up to the athlete to get his name on a card, do well, get his name on another card, get his name. It's rarely within one promotion. They're bouncing around trying to make waves. Maybe they can get, on an undercard, or they get a EBI. They get on an EBI as a special fight, and that's like, okay, maybe I could leverage this now to get on some other event. If Flow had an infrastructure, it was like, hey, you want to be on Who's Number One? You got to do one of these challenger tournaments. You got to place top 3. You place top 3 in a challenger tournament, then we're going to take a look at you. Something that's defined. It's not, I sent a DM, I got an auto reply. Let's fast for 3 days and hope that the Lord, blesses us with a response from the new GM. I think it has to be a more defined infrastructure where me as a coach, I can look at my guy and go, Tyler, you're dope. We need to get you down to Atlanta, or we need to go to wherever the city is where the next challenger event is, or whatever it is, right? To get you in. So there's a clear pathway that does not exist right now in the game.
It's like our friend Catherine says, right? Like, you don't want to be Coke versus Pepsi. A lot of these tournaments, like, whether, I'm not going to name any specific names, but they're interchangeable, right? You don't look at them and say, this is unique or it's special. You're like, oh, it's another tournament. It's like, oh, they got some good guys fighting on it. Maybe I'll consider buying it. But that's not where we want to be, right? We want to be where everything's like connective tissue, where everything leads in, makes storytelling easier. What's next after the event? There's always something to look forward to, right? Like the WWE, I'm not a big WWE guy, but clearly, like, the whole point of the WWE is making and weaving in these storylines and constantly creating a reason to tune in the next week, the next month, the next pay-per-view, whatever it is. So I think we could like learn a little bit of that in that storytelling. And it's very hard to storytell for these one-off events where you have prize fighters who are just doing an event based on money. They don't care about the next event, right? They're not focused on building up your promotion. There's no shared sense of loyalty back and forth between the two. It's the ultimate prize fight, right? So how do you create a storyline for that? How do you build on the last event when you don't even know if you're going to have that athlete for the next event? So if we do what you're saying, I think, and create those tournaments and those qualifiers and build that connective tissue, I think there's something really there to make Who's Number One and other things we're doing even more special.
Yeah, there's a hook. And I think that helps. It doesn't solve it, but it helps the consumer look at their outlay of money to Flo as an investment, because our wrestling coach, yeah, man, he's like he's going to go up there next weekend and like he's going to try to get a spot, or he's going to do this, he's going to do that. We want to watch it, we want to support it, versus I want to watch Gordon Ryan and Felipe Pena, so I'm going to shell the money out because I want to watch it. But it's an expense and I don't feel good about it. My wife's irritated, right? Versus, hey, this is our guy. Like, this is the company that's providing a path for him potentially to get there. So I want to pony up and see if I can help him move forward. Like, I think those kinds of things certainly would help, even if it's a very, small scale thing in the beginning. Just to know this is the starting point would be huge for the jiu-jitsu athlete.
Yeah, I agree, man. There's, I think it's, you keep hitting on this point over and over again, which is like athlete favoritism and things like that. And, I think there's obviously going to be some level of that in any promotion. I mean, the NBA is not covering LeBron and Luka the same way that they're the bench player on the Pacers, right?
Yeah, of course.
There's going to be some of that naturally. But one of the things we all like about jiu-jitsu is that it's It's you don't get to win the jiu-jitsu tournament because your dad's the coach or your dad and mom paid something.
Nepo. There's no Nepo babies in jiu-jitsu. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the idea is that, you get your hand raised because you worked the hardest, you trained the most, you did the most conditioning, whatever it was. But to your point, then people feel like that's one of the things I love about jiu-jitsu. That's why we want our kids training jiu-jitsu, because we want them to learn that hard work pays off, and we don't want them to have excuses for why they didn't get things done that you have in basketball or football or some of these other sports that are just more gray areas of who's the best talent as a young kid and stuff. But what you're saying is like jiu-jitsu has that, but then jiu-jitsu content or jiu-jitsu promotions don't have that, right? Because you're favoring athletes. It's not fair. How do you open it up? And I guess, I got to figure that out, but like certainly something on the top of my mind of like, how do we connect that tissue? And then how do we open it up so more of that untapped, unknown talent has an actual shot at coming in there? If you're calling your promotion who's number one, like we'll make it really right?
Yeah. That's actually a great point. Speaking of who's number one, who's number one's coming up on the 18th, right? We got a pretty big matchup with Kanan Duarte and Nicky Rod. And I know Nicky Rod came off of a tough loss at Fight Pass Invitational. What are your thoughts? This is going to be your first who's number one as the GM. How excited are you for this? And what is your mission going into it?
Well, for me, this is really a learning experience from the Flow side, right? I've never been to a who's number one tournament. I've certainly never went behind the scenes and seen all the inner workings leading up to it, what we're doing well, where we could improve, things like that. So I'm really honestly trying to stay out of the way and take a lot of notes for the most part, because I want to figure out where we can improve this in the future, both for the athletes and the fans. I would say that as a fan, this card is stacked, right? This card is awesome. It's not just the fight you just mentioned. It's really like top to bottom action, small guys, big guys, everything on there. And there's some big names on this card. So I'm pretty excited about this. This is certainly a card I would have tuned into whether I was at Flow or not, to see it, because there's enough there. It's not just that one match at the end.
Oh, absolutely. When you start looking at the card, there's some real big names and some young guys and girls that are really on the up. Andrew Tackett, Helena Krevar, Elizabeth Clay. These are, we know Victor Hugo's a pretty established name. Most folks have heard of Luke Griffith. And then there's also some OG guys on here. You got Shanji Hibero, which is, if you're new to jiu-jitsu or you're into it and you don't know who Shanji is, you got to stop what you're doing right now. Go to YouTube, look up Shanji, and watch his matches, because this is one of the best who's ever done it. He's fantastic. And he's going up against really another guy who's, I love Boogie, but Richie Martinez he's getting close to the old guy division now. And hey, man, I'm past the old guy. I'm in like the extra old guy division, so I can say that. But Boogie's always entertaining. He's a great name, super fun to work with, super welcoming guy. Everybody's family to that guy. And so that's also a great name to have on the card. So just to your point, there's some really big names on this card, and there's some OGs and there's some new folks that I think if our listeners are watching, you should definitely go sign up. You can get the month or you can get the year. We now know you can sign up for a month. Watch who's number one coming up on the 18th. And, it's got to be interesting for you because, like you said, you're going into your first who's number one. You're the GM. Are you going to make an announcement? Are you going to get on the mic? Are you going to do a little bebopping? Like, what's the plan for Ben? Like, are we going to see you in a suit? What are you going to be doing?
Breakdance. They haven't done breakdance before.
With Boogie? You guys have a little duo set up?
I never even thought about what I'm going to wear, actually. But, yeah. So they're doing some announcements here leading up. I think a press release is going out tomorrow about the BJJ Stars deal that we have, and card coming up, and they're coupling my announcement in with that press release, just as sort of like the official press release announcement. They're going to be doing something that'll air on air during the fight for an interview that I'm going to do. Just, a few questions, announcing that I'm here. But like I said, it's checking the box as far as some of these announcements, listening,
sure.
Learning, kind of hearing the feedback of the community, hearing the feedback internally, making sure we understand what we're going to do moving forward. Because I really think, look, Flo's got a great base. It's got a great history. Obviously, last year was a little tough with the whole ADCC, Craig Jones, people picking sides. That wasn't probably the best time in the history of the company, right? And so I think, look, we can go back to, some really great communication with people and really go back to being that source of truth for the jiu-jitsu community that you can tune into and know that, hey, Flo is going to be covering the most diverse content with the best rights and the best streams and, even, possibly the best instructionals. There's so much we can add to the platform to be a one-stop shop for a jiu-jitsu fan, right? Where people feel like they're getting that value there. And look, it's not going to be in a month or 2 months, but my hope is that in a year or 2 years or whatever it is, we're moving in that direction. And eventually we're having this conversation 18 months from now. And you're like, holy shit, I noticed a big difference in FloGrappling. And I am super stoked about the direction you guys are going. I see a bunch of improvements. I love it. I love the content. I love everything you guys got going on here for the most part. I'm not just buying this as I have to have it for these couple events I want per year. And instead you're like, hey, I'm kind of a super fan of this platform now.
Yeah, I think that being a fan of the platform, I think is huge. Being a fan of Flo, not just I'm a fan of this guy and I want to watch it. I'm going to pay to watch it, but I really like what they're doing. I want to support it. I want to be a part of it. Two more questions, and then I know you got to run, but I want to shoot these two out. Have you thought about, or are you thinking about, in any type of integration or cross promotion with Flo Wrestling? Because when we're talking about talent and grapplers, Flo Wrestling is packed with them. And we know that jiu-jitsu is grappling. It's not like these two things are separate things. They're the same thing with different rules. All right. So is there any kind of push to see if there's a synergistic relationship?
So, first of all, I love Flo Wrestling in the sense the business of Flo Wrestling is extremely strong and powerful, and they do an amazing job. It's very clear to me here from being at the company that they are something to aspire to for, a business vertical here. And, look, Flo Wrestling owns a lot of data, track wrestling, everything from people entering tournaments and having a lot of that historical data that can then be put together with other, parts of the platform that make it really unique and interesting. When you go to an event for wrestling, almost everyone has up on their screens either track wrestling or the Flo Wrestling app, right?
Yes, I use it all the time. My son wrestled in high school. We were on track the whole time.
They have a huge content team here that most of them have been here 6, 8, 10, 12 years. There's just a lot of stability in Flo Wrestling. It's a great business. My obvious answer to that is yes, because I think that there's a lot of wrestling guys crossing over into jiu-jitsu, and vice versa. Jiu-jitsu guys now realizing they don't want to be like Ben and Tim, and they actually want to know how to wrestle. So
what are you saying?
it seems like there's something there. What that is yet, I don't really know. I have a feeling this Craig Gable match at CJI is probably going to create a lot of hype and almost like not animosity, but interest between the two communities. And people are obviously in the wrestling community want to see Gable absolutely smash Craig and show that wrestling is the superior grappling art. And the jiu-jitsu guys are going to want to see if Craig can leg lock this monster of a man who looks almost, shit. That's a tough match, by the way. Like, even if you're really good at jiu-jitsu, you're going to deal with that guy. But that's another story for another day. The answer is like, yes, I'd love to figure it out. I don't really have any like concrete plans yet for how we're going to do that.
I'm glad you brought up Craig, because that's part of my second question, which is, have you reached out or spoken with Gordon Ryan or Craig Jones since you've stepped into this role?
Craig is a close friend of mine now. He's been a great advocate of Guardian, both Craig and his partner, Seth Bilal. So we become very close over the last year. So we talk a fair amount. And, he, I think at first was kind of a little confused, like, oh, why are you going to do this? Like, you've got Guardian. I think over time we realized, like, hey, this actually fits in with my plans too. I want to bring the jiu-jitsu community back closer together. I don't want to be this divisive force anymore like I did last year with ADC and CPI. And I think that, I see this as a way to sort of bring him back into the fold over time with things that we're doing and help each other out to grow our respective businesses. I don't have a relationship with Gordon yet, to be honest. I would like to have a relationship with Gordon. Just because I'm friends with Craig doesn't mean that like I have anything against Gordon because of their beef or previous beef. I don't even know where that stands right now. I thought it's just like Guardian, like I'm Switzerland, right? I get along with everybody. Bad relationships that I can think of, if any, in the industry. And I can, be friends with different people from different schools, right? That's not a problem. I did train with Danaher last night. We had a great 30-minute conversation about, things he'd like to see improved at FloGrappling and his perceptions and things like that of, both flow and just the overall industry. And that was amazing. It was first of all, and by the way, it was that was the most amazing class I've ever taken in my life, by the way. That was just like, I expected greatness and I got like super beyond greatness, right? It was just like a master class of teaching a technique, breaking it down to a simple level. But anyway, everybody's going to be reached out to. Everyone has the ability to get in touch with me now and talk, all those guys at the top. So I hope, we can figure out whatever. Obviously not going to be best friends with everybody for different reasons, meaning not everybody's going to want to have the same level of communication, but there's no reason to have any animosity or play any favorites there, right? My job now is to do what's best for Flow. And, whatever that is, whether that's like a personal friendship or someone that I don't know, like, let's make it happen.
I got to say, just in parting, I'm really hopeful. I really am, because I want to love flow grappling. Mm-hmm. Like, it's grappling. It's a gigantic jiu-jitsu platform that has tons of athletes, pays these guys, puts money in their pockets, puts people to work that, most of the people that work for flow grappling do jiu-jitsu. And on some level or another, they're involved in jiu-jitsu. And that helps put food on their table. And I'm a super fan of that. And I'm a super fan of jiu-jitsu. I love jiu-jitsu. It's an awesome sport. It's an amazing martial art. And it's a great community. Most of my friends are from the jiu-jitsu world. My closest friends are jiu-jitsu people. So I want to see Flow win. I want to see the perception change. I want people to look at it as an investment, and I want them to feel like they're getting value out of it. And I think despite last year and the picking of sides and this and that, blah, 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 and the criticisms and all that stuff, I think the jiu-jitsu community also is hopeful for Flow and would love to see a turnaround. I don't think anyone's rooting against it.
Yeah.
Having said that, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that I'm sure there's like that 1% that are just so upset about something. Their stream went down 5 years ago that they're just never going to consider Flow again, and that's fine. But most of the conversations that I have to say privately with friends, people that I can trust, they go something like, hey, like, what do you think about Flow Grappling? And they say, well, I hate flow grappling, or I used to have flow grappling. They go, cool, like why? And it's almost always kind of the things that you're alluding to, which is like, oh, I don't like the way their billing works, or, oh, I don't like, this stream at this particular event. I wasn't allowed to film when I went into ADCC last year or something. Like it's almost all like very manageable complaints or objections, in my opinion, and things that we either are addressing, or maybe even in the case of like billing have addressed already, and they just haven't been communicated properly. So I think that gives me a lot of hope. Like I'm not hearing like flow content or flow grappling's content guys are idiots and don't know anything about grappling. Like that's not a complaint.
Right.
Knowledgeable, right? It's just like, hey, let's change the policy for who can film at these events, or how you can film for all these new creators, right? This is a new media landscape. Or hey, like let's make it clear that we can have monthly billing, or maybe we should call it pay-per-view billing, because then people don't compare it monthly to a yearly price. People are used to buying a pay-per-view. Like there's little tweaks that are just communication and marketing and, simple messaging tweaks that I think we can make. So it gives me a lot of hope too. And at the end of the day, like I can say this pretty confidently, like Flow is not the bad guy in jiu-jitsu, right? There's other companies out there that are starting to become, I would say, more aggressive and more legal, more exclusive. And like maybe that shift here is going to turn over the next year or two as some of those honeymoon periods wear off, and people like you realize, wow, that's really great for the top 10 guy who got this exclusive, amazing contract, but he's not fighting as much. His content's not as available. Now he's not doing seminars anymore that I used to like to go to. And you're like, shit, like that whole thing that was supposed to be so good, maybe it's not so good. So Flow can kind of regain a better footing and better perception in the community that way.
Yeah, there's always unintended consequences. That's for certain. Before we wrap, what would you like to just say to the jiu-jitsu community as the general manager of Flow Grappling? I don't think anyone from Flow has ever addressed the jiu-jitsu community, not recently. So what is your parting message to us?
I mean, I guess I hadn't really thought about this question, to be honest, before we got on, but I would just say that, like, let's just step back from Flow and just make it a little bit more inclusive of the industry, that all of these promotions, for the most part, that are going on, certainly within the United States, almost all of them are being led by people who are passionate about the sport, who are trying to pay the athletes, who are paying the events and are paying the insurance. And I don't think anybody's really making money doing this right now. I think I can pretty confidently say that, at least of any size. I think like Seth at Fight to Win, right, on a smaller scale, where he's going around the country and doing these localized events, has probably figured it out, for example. But none of like the major promotions that are doing the professional athlete major pay, et cetera, are really doing that. And I don't think any of them necessarily are like the bad guy today. And I think that if you want to invest in the sport, as I said before, and you want to help see your teammates have a platform where they can get to, if you want to watch the best matches, if you want to have the best entertainment and lead up content, subscribing to these different platforms, whether it's a UFC Fight Pass or whether it's Flow Grappling, et cetera, is a small investment compared to what you're making in the sport. And just, consider looking at it maybe that way instead. And your investment is going to allow these platforms to invest more back in the athletes and do more of this content. You can be part of the solution, right? I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, that's great. You work for Flow. Easy for you to say. But I didn't really understand that either until I took this job. So it's sort of opening up my eyes to the reality of just how hard it is to pull these promotions off.
Ben, thank you so much. I'm happy for you. I'm happy for Flow. I'm pulling for you guys. I really want to see this get turned around. Thank you for giving me an hour of your time today, man. I appreciate it. I'll definitely be watching Who's Number One coming up on the 18th. And if you have questions, complaints, grievances, ideas, if it's Festivus, anything you want to say to Flow, look up Ben Kovacs, DM him directly, get the message to the filter. That's my message to the jiu-jitsu world. We're going to have to take this to the streets. We're going to have to get rowdy and raucous, and we're going to have to make some big major changes. Ben, thank you very much, man. I appreciate you. It's great talking to you today.
You too, Tim. See you, brother. Thanks for having me.
All right, have a good one. All right, brother. Bye.